She stood at the top of the grand staircase, a beautifully full-figured woman in a sea of size 0 socialites, completely alone. But before the cruel whispers could even begin, the city's most feared crime boss bypassed the billionaires and supermodels, extended his hand, and claimed the first dance. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was a glittering viper's nest. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden light over the elite of New York society, illuminating fortunes built on old money and new corruption. Clara Bennett stood near a towering column of white marble, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She did not belong here, and the room knew it. Clara was a woman of substance in every sense of the word, while the wives and daughters of senators and CEOs floated past in sheer, wispy fabrics that clung to their waif-like frames. Clara took up space. She was unapologetically fat, her generous curves wrapped in a custom-made emerald green velvet gown that hugged her broad hips and cinched tightly at her waist. The deep color contrasted sharply with her pale skin, making her look like a Renaissance painting dropped into a modern fashion editorial. She was breathtaking, but in a society that valued shrinking women, her presence was an act of defiance. She could feel the eyes on her. Over by the champagne fountain, Penelope Hastings, a notoriously vicious heiress, leaned into the ear of a cosmetic mogul, her eyes flicking toward Clara with a razor-thin smile. Clara knew exactly what they were whispering about. Until 3 days ago, Clara was supposed to be escorted by Simon, Penelope's cousin, and a rising partner at Clara's accounting firm. But Simon had bailed, citing irreconcilable social differences, a polite way of saying he was too cowardly to be seen with a plus-size woman when a promotion was on the line. But Clara hadn't stayed home to cry. She came to the gala alone because the ticket was in her name. More importantly, she had a job to do. Her fingers tightened around her beaded vintage clutch. Inside, beneath her lipstick and a compact mirror, was a small, encrypted USB drive. Clara was a senior forensic auditor. For 6 months, she had been quietly tracking millions of dollars bleeding out of the city's largest real estate development project. She had followed the paper trail through dummy corporations and offshore accounts until it led straight to the doorstep of the Costa Syndicate, the most violent and powerful organized crime family on the East Coast. Tonight, she was supposed to hand the drive over to Special Agent Harrison Miller of the FBI, who was working undercover as part of the catering staff. "Just drop it in his tray," Harrison had told her over a burner phone yesterday. "You hand it off, you walk out, and you forget you ever saw those ledgers." Clara took a slow, deep breath, smoothing the heavy velvet over her thighs. She scanned the room. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos wove through the crowd, carrying silver trays of caviar and champagne. None of them were Harrison. Panic, cold and sharp, began to uncoil in her stomach. It was 9:45 p.m. The drop was scheduled for 9:30. "Looking for someone, sweetheart?" A greasy voice purred behind her. Clara turned to see Richard Vance. No, wait, Richard Donovan, a notorious corporate lobbyist whose hands were as dirty as his morals. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her full chest before settling on her face with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "I heard Simon cut you loose. Brave of you to show up. Though I suppose a buffet like this is hard to resist." Clara's spine stiffened. She leveled a cold, unblinking glare at the man. "I'm here for the charity auction, Richard. Though looking at the guest list, I see they've lowered their standards for admission." Donovan sneered, leaning in closer. He smelled of expensive scotch and cheap cigars. Watch your mouth, Clara. You're swimming in deep waters tonight. Without Simon to protect you, a heavy girl like you might just sink to the bottom." Before Clara could deliver a blistering retort, a sudden, heavy silence fell over the ballroom. It wasn't a gradual hush. It was instantaneous, as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. The string quartet, halfway through a lively Vivaldi piece, scraped to a halt. Clara turned her head, following the terrified gaze of Richard Donovan and the rest of the high society crowd. The heavy mahogany double doors at the entrance of the ballroom had swung open. Standing in the threshold was Damien Costa. Damien Costa did not look like a man who operated in the shadows. He looked like he owned the sun. Tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a bespoke midnight blue Brioni tuxedo, he radiated a terrifying, magnetic authority. His sharp jawline and piercing, ice-pale eyes gave him the look of a predatory bird. He was 35, a billionaire, and the undisputed king of the city's underworld. Rumor had it he had once dismantled a rival cartel with nothing but a phone call and a lighter. He was flanked by 3 massive men who moved with lethal grace, their eyes scanning the room like radar. The mayor of New York, standing near the ice sculpture, actually took a physical step backward. The socialites who had been sneering at Clara a moment ago were now holding their breath, adjusting their posture, desperate to be noticed and terrified to be seen. The master of ceremonies, a sweating, trembling man in a red velvet jacket, stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered. "The first waltz. As is tradition, the floor belongs to our most generous benefactor." Damien had apparently bought his way to the top of the donor list. The crowd parted perfectly down the middle, creating a wide, polished runway on the marble floor. Dozens of beautiful, slender women instinctively stepped forward, fixing their hair, offering hopeful, desperate smiles. A prominent senator's daughter practically shoved her way to the front, her sheer gown shimmering. Damien ignored them all. His ice-blue eyes cut through the room, sweeping past the billionaires, the politicians, and the models, until they locked dead onto Clara. Clara's heart stopped. She froze against the marble pillar. "He knows," her brain screamed. "He knows about the flash drive." Damien began to walk. The slow, rhythmic click of his polished shoes echoed in the silent ballroom. He bypassed the senator's daughter. He walked right past Richard Donovan, who immediately shrank back into the crowd like a frightened rat. Damien stopped exactly 2 feet in front of Clara. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He smelled of rain, bergamot, and gunpowder. Clara felt overwhelmingly exposed, her large, soft body a stark contrast to his hard, chiseled frame. But she refused to cower. She tilted her chin up, meeting his terrifying gaze. "Miss Bennet," Damien said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver straight down her spine. "Mr. Costa," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. He extended a large, scarred hand toward her. "They're playing our song." The orchestra hadn't even lifted their bows yet. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Why her? Why the fat accountant? Is this a joke? Clara looked at his hand, then up at his face. "I don't dance, Mr. Costa. And even if I did, I wouldn't dance with you." The corner of Damien's mouth twitched upward in a dark, dangerous smirk. He leaned in, his lips hovering a mere inch from her ear. When he spoke, his voice was meant only for her. "Agent Harrison Miller is dead, Clara," he whispered softly. Clara's blood ran ice-cold. Her breath hitched, her fingers tightening around her clutch in a death grip. "He was intercepted in the kitchen 10 minutes ago," Damien continued, his tone conversational, as if commenting on the weather. "The men who killed him work for the Antonov family. They know you have the drive. They are currently covering all 4 exits of this ballroom." Damien pulled back slightly, locking his eyes with hers. "If you try to walk out of here alone, you will be dead before you reach the valet. If you take my hand and dance with me, you live." Clara swallowed hard. Her mind raced. As a forensic accountant, she lived by logic, numbers, and calculated risks. The probability of survival without the FBI agent was 0. The probability of survival in the arms of a Mafia boss? Unknown. But unknown was better than 0. Slowly, her hand trembling just a fraction, she placed her palm in his. Damien's grip was firm and hot. Without a word, he pulled her away from the pillar and led her to the dead center of the ballroom floor. He signaled the conductor with a brief nod. The orchestra immediately launched into a hauntingly beautiful sweeping waltz. Damien pulled Clara flush against him. One of his large hands enveloped hers, while the other settled firmly on the bare skin of her lower back, exposed by the deep cut of the emerald gown. Clara gasped at the contact. She was hyper-aware of her own body. The plushness of her stomach against his rigid abs, the weight of her thighs as they moved together. She expected him to hold her at a distance, to be disgusted by her size, but instead he held her tightly, dominantly, claiming her space entirely. He guided her into the first sweeping turn. He was a flawless dancer. "You're stiff," Damien murmured, spinning her smoothly past a group of gaping onlookers. "You just told me there are assassins at the door," Clara hissed back, trying to follow his footwork. "Forgive me if my waltz is a little rusty." "Keep your eyes on me. Smile," he commanded. "Make them believe I chose you, because I couldn't resist you." Clara let out a bitter, breathless laugh. "Yes, because that is highly believable. Damien Costa bypassing a room full of supermodels for a size 18 accountant." Damien's hand on her back tightened, his fingers pressing into her curves with sudden, possessive intensity. He pulled her a fraction of an inch closer, lowering his head until his cheek brushed hers. "You underestimate yourself, Clara," he whispered, his voice vibrating through her chest. "Those women are glass, breakable, boring. I prefer a woman with substance, a woman smart enough to dismantle my entire financial empire from a cubicle on the 40th floor." Clara stumbled. He effortlessly caught her, dipping her deeply in time with the dramatic swell of the violins. "You knew," she gasped as he pulled her back upright. "Of course I knew," Damien said smoothly, guiding her across the floor. "I've been monitoring your investigation for 3 months. I know about the late nights, the takeout coffee, the way you chew on your pen when the ledgers don't balance. I also know that the money you thought was mine belongs to the Antonovs. They used my network to launder it. You didn't uncover my crimes, Clara. You uncovered theirs." Clara's mind reeled. If the Antonovs were laundering money through Costa's network, then Costa didn't want the drive to destroy it. He wanted the drive to find out how they breached his system. Clara breathed, looking up into those terrifyingly calm, ice-blue eyes. "I'm the bait." "You were the bait the moment the FBI sent you in here alone," Damien corrected, his gaze turning lethal as he looked over her shoulder toward the main exit. "Now, you're under my protection." "Why?" "Because," Damien said, spinning her so sharply her heavy emerald skirt flared out around them like a dark green storm. "You have my property in your purse, and nobody touches what belongs to me." As the music crescendoed, Damien's eyes locked onto a waiter moving aggressively through the crowd, reaching into his tuxedo jacket. "Hold on to me," Damien ordered. The dance was over. The war had just begun. The transformation from a glamorous high society waltz to a war zone took less than 2 seconds. Clara barely had time to register the metallic glint of the suppressed Sig Sauer, P226, sliding from the waiter's tuxedo jacket before Damien's hand clamped down on the back of her neck. He did not ask her to move. He forced her down, using his own large frame as a human shield. The first gunshot was a muffled thwip, immediately followed by the deafening, catastrophic shattering of the Waldorf Astoria's centerpiece ice sculpture. Shards of frozen water and expensive beluga caviar exploded across the marble floor. The ballroom erupted into sheer, unadulterated pandemonium. Billionaires and socialites, who moments ago had been sneering at Clara's emerald velvet gown, were now dropping to the floor, screaming and crawling over one another in a desperate bid for the heavy mahogany doors. Damien didn't look back. His arm wrapped around Clara's thick waist like an iron band, hauling her upright as his other hand seamlessly produced a matte black Glock 19 from beneath his custom Brioni jacket. "Move, Clara! Keep your weight low and stay behind me!" Damien roared over the deafening chorus of screams and shattering glass. Clara's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was not built for sprinting. Her lush, full-figured body was wrapped in layers of heavy velvet, and her strapless bodice felt like a corset as she gasped for air. But adrenaline was a powerful fuel. She kicked off her emerald-dyed satin pumps, leaving them abandoned on the dance floor, and gripped Damien's broad shoulder as he bulldozed a path toward the service corridors. 3 men in catering uniforms blocked their path near the champagne fountain. They weren't holding trays. Before Clara could even scream, Damien's 3 bodyguards, massive men who moved with terrifying synchronization, intercepted them. The largest bodyguard, a towering brute named Dominic, tackled the first assassin through a table of hors d'oeuvres. Gunfire exchanged rapidly, the sharp cracks echoing over the frantic string quartet who had completely abandoned the Vivaldi piece to flee. "Through the kitchen, now," Damien ordered, his grip on Clara's waist never loosening. He practically carried her through the swinging stainless steel doors, his sheer strength compensating for her stumbling feet. The kitchen was a chaotic labyrinth of abandoned prep stations, boiling pots of lobster bisque, and screaming culinary staff. And there, sprawled near the walk-in freezer, was the horrific confirmation of Damien's warning. Special Agent Harrison Miller lay motionless on the industrial tile, his white catering shirt stained a dark, blooming crimson. Clara choked back a sob, her hands flying to her mouth. She had spoken to Harrison just yesterday. He had a wife, a dog. "Don't look," Damien commanded, his voice a harsh, grounding anchor in the swirling nightmare. He yanked her forward, shielding her line of sight with his broad shoulders. "Keep moving, Clara. If you stop, you join him." They burst out of the kitchen's rear loading dock into the freezing, rain-slicked alleyway off 50th Street. The sudden blast of cold November air hit Clara like a physical blow, shocking her system. Her velvet dress, while magnificent indoors, offered zero protection against the biting New York wind. She shivered violently, her bare feet aching against the rough, wet asphalt. Tires screeched as a convoy of 3 armored, midnight black Mercedes-Maybach S680 Guard sedans tore into the alley, their headlights blindingly bright. The doors of the center vehicle swung open before it even rolled to a complete stop. "Get in!" Damien barked, shoving her into the spacious, leather-lined cavern of the back seat. He dove in right behind her, slamming the heavy ballistic door shut just as a hail of bullets sparked against the reinforced exterior hull. "Drive!" Damien shouted to the driver. The Maybach's V12 engine roared, and the heavy vehicle peeled out of the alley, throwing Clara back against the plush leather seats. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound inside the cabin was the ragged, heavy breathing of its two occupants. Outside, the sirens of the NYPD began to wail in the distance, a chaotic symphony fading as the Maybach merged aggressively onto the FDR drive, speeding south toward the financial district. Clara sat trembling in the corner of the back seat. Her beautiful emerald gown was torn at the hem, her bare feet were scraped and bruised, and her immaculate updo had collapsed, sending thick waves of dark hair cascading over her bare shoulders. She felt completely stripped bare, utterly out of her depth. The adrenaline was beginning to crash, leaving behind a cold, nauseating terror. Damien engaged the privacy partition, a thick sheet of soundproof glass rising to separate them from the driver. He holstered his weapon and turned to her. In the dim, ambient lighting of the luxury car, his ice-pale eyes looked almost luminous. He wasn't breathing heavily. He didn't look terrified. He looked invigorated. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a pristine, monogrammed silk handkerchief. Without asking permission, he reached across the wide console and gently wiped a streak of soot and grease from Clara's pale cheek. His touch was shockingly gentle. The juxtaposition of a ruthless Mafia boss tenderly cleaning her face sent a confusing jolt of heat straight to her core. "You did well back there," Damien murmured, his deep voice filling the quiet cabin. "Most people would have frozen. You kept on your feet." Clara smacked his hand away, the sudden burst of anger overriding her fear. "Don't patronize me," she snapped, her voice trembling but fierce. "A federal agent is dead. I was almost shot over a charity dinner. You used me to flush out the Antonov syndicate." "I saved your life," Damien corrected coldly, leaning back against the leather. "The Antonovs knew who you were before you even stepped out of your Uber tonight. If I hadn't claimed you on that dance floor, you would be bleeding out next to the champagne fountain right now." Clara wrapped her arms around her full breasts, suddenly acutely aware of how little clothing she was wearing and how much space she occupied in the seat. She felt defensive, exposed. "So what happens now? You take me to some underground bunker? Torture me for the flash drive? Drop me in the East River?" Damien let out a low, rumbling laugh that sounded like a luxury car engine. His gaze drifted down her body, taking in the plush curve of her hips, the soft, generous swell of her thighs beneath the velvet, and the defiant set of her jaw. There was no disgust in his eyes. There wasn't even polite tolerance. It was raw, unadulterated hunger. "I don't torture beautiful women, Clara," he said softly, "and I certainly don't drown them. I protect what is mine. And right now, you and that little USB drive in your clutch are the most valuable things in my city." Clara's grip on her beaded purse tightened. She was a forensic auditor. She survived by analyzing data, balancing scales, and understanding leverage. Damien Costa might be a king, but right now, she held the keys to his kingdom. "The drive stays with me," Clara said, lifting her chin, "until I know exactly what I am dealing with." Damien smiled. It was a dangerous, breathtaking smile. "We are going to get along spectacularly, Miss Bennett." The Maybach bypassed the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan and plunged into the private subterranean garage of a hyper-modern luxury high-rise in Tribeca. Damien Costa did not live in a shadowy warehouse. He lived in a $40 million triplex penthouse that hovered above the city like an eagle's nest. As they rode the private elevator up to the top floor, Clara took a moment to assess her situation. She was trapped with a crime lord, holding evidence of international money laundering, and her only ally in the FBI was dead. Logically, she should be paralyzed with fear. Yet standing next to Damien, smelling the faint scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the sharp tang of gunpowder, she felt a bizarre, inexplicable sense of security. The elevator doors chimed and parted, revealing a massive open-concept living space encased entirely in floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass. The sweeping views of the illuminated New York skyline were breathtaking, but Clara barely noticed. Her attention was drawn to the sprawling velvet sofas, the priceless modern art, and the sprawling mahogany desk in the corner. "Dominic will bring you a medical kit for your feet," Damien said, shrugging off his suit jacket and tossing it over a chair. The holstered shoulder rig over his crisp white shirt emphasized the broad, muscular expanse of his chest. "And I'll have my staff find you something more comfortable to wear." "I am fine as I am," Clara said stubbornly, refusing to let him dictate her comfort. She limped over to the mahogany desk and dropped her beaded clutch onto its polished surface. She unclasped the purse and pulled out the small, encrypted black USB drive. Damien walked slowly toward her, stopping on the opposite side of the desk. He looked at the drive, then up into her eyes. "Do you know exactly what is on that drive, Clara?" he asked, his tone shifting from protective to strictly business. "I know it contains the routed transactions for the Hudson Yards redevelopment," Clara replied, shifting into her professional persona. "I tracked $300 million being systematically siphoned through phantom LLCs registered in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. I assumed it was you. The Costa Syndicate owns the concrete unions and the zoning boards." "We do," Damien agreed, leaning his knuckles against the desk. "But we don't bleed our own city dry. The Antonovs moved into New York 6 months ago. They couldn't bypass my banking network, so they piggybacked on it. They manipulated my ledgers to wash their heroin money, and they framed me for the theft." Clara's brow furrowed. She mentally flipped through the thousands of spreadsheets she had analyzed. "That's impossible," she said, shaking her head. "To embed those fake LLCs into your network without triggering your internal audits, they would need an insider. Someone with high-level access to your corporate front's tax filings." "Exactly," Damien said, his eyes narrowing. "Someone at your accounting firm." The realization hit Clara like a freight train. The puzzle pieces rapidly snapped together in her brilliant mind. "Simon," she whispered, the color draining from her face. "Simon Hastings," Damien confirmed, nodding slowly. "Your former escort for the evening. He has been selling my access codes to the Antonovs to cover his gambling debts. When he realized you were auditing the very accounts he corrupted, he panicked. He tipped off the Antonovs that you were going to the FBI tonight. He didn't just bail on you for the Gala, Clara. He set you up to be slaughtered." Clara gripped the edge of the desk. The betrayal stung, but the sheer, cold-blooded malice of it was suffocating. Simon, the man who had constantly made passive-aggressive comments about her weight, who told her she needed to wear slimming black to partner meetings, had essentially signed her death warrant. "He thought I was stupid," Clara whispered, her voice shaking with a potent mix of grief and rising rage. "He thought because I was quiet, because I didn't fit in with the thin, aggressive corporate sharks, that I wouldn't notice the discrepancies." Damien rounded the desk. He didn't stop until he was standing mere inches from her. Clara looked up, her breath catching in her throat as his large hands gently grasped her bare shoulders, his thumbs tracing the line of her collarbone. "Men like Simon are fools," Damien said, his voice dropping an octave, rich and vibrating with intensity. "They look at you and see someone to push around. I look at you and see a woman who single-handedly unraveled a $300 million international conspiracy with nothing but a laptop and a cup of coffee. Clara swallowed hard, her heart pounding. I'm not exactly standard mob boss arm candy, Mr. Costa. Standard is boring. Standard is weak, Damien murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips before dragging slowly down the deep plunge of her emerald gown, tracing the generous, beautiful curves of her body. You are magnificent, Clara. You take up space in a world that tells women to shrink. You command the room. When you walked into that ballroom tonight, you eclipsed every woman there. You think I claimed the first dance just to save you. I claimed you because the moment I saw you, I knew you were going to be mine. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. No man had ever spoken to her like this. No man had ever looked at her heavy, soft body as if it were a masterpiece. It was terrifying and intoxicating all at once. "What do you want from me, Damien?" she breathed. "I need your brain," Damien said, gently pushing a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. "I need you to decode the Antonov ledgers on that drive. Find the back door Simon built. Help me strip them of every dime they stole, and help me destroy them. And in return, Damien said, his voice a dark, velvet promise, Simon Hastings will never see the light of day again. You will have a permanent place at my side, my protection, my resources, and my loyalty. You will never walk into a room alone again." Clara looked at the USB drive, then back into the eyes of the most dangerous man in New York. She had walked into the Waldorf Astoria as an invisible, discarded accountant. She was walking out as the architect of a Mafia war. She picked up the encrypted flash drive and held it between her fingers. She didn't shrink back. She stood tall, letting her full presence occupy the space between them. "I want full access to your offshore mainframes," Clara demanded, her voice steady and commanding. "And when this is over, I want the Costa Syndicate to fund a forensic scholarship in Harrison Miller's name at New York Presbyterian." Damien's smile widened, a look of pure, predatory pride washing over his face. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a fierce, searing kiss that tasted of danger, power, and absolute possession. "Done," he whispered against her mouth. "Now, Miss Bennet, let's balance the books." What an electrifying finale. Clara didn't just survive the night. She turned the tables and claimed her power alongside the city's most dangerous kingpin. Will Clara and Damien's explosive new partnership bring down the Antonovs, or will the underworld tear them apart? If you loved this thrilling Mafia romance and want more fierce, curvy heroines who don't back down, smash that like button. Share this story with your friends and subscribe for more incredible tales. Leave a comment below.